Welcome back to the channel. Here you'll find the fastest updates on breaking news, shocking secrets, and dramatic predictions for times. The young and the restless. Who will betray whom? What secrets are about to be revealed? And what horrific tragedy awaits the characters in Genoa City? Subscribe, turn on notifications, and join us to discover the unmissable developments right now. Hello and welcome back to our channel on this beautiful day. Today, we are diving deep into the darkest corners of Genoa City, exploring a storyline that threatens to shatter the Newman family forever. Grab a comfortable seat as we unpack the psychological warfare, hidden secrets, and devastating choices currently unfolding on the young and the restless. Let us begin. The fragile peace that Sharon Rosales desperately tried to construct following her daughter's release from a mental health facility has completely shattered, replaced by a suffocating blanket of dread. Mariah Copeland returned to Genoa City carrying a dangerous, delusional optimism, a fractured psychological state that allowed her to view the notoriously malevolent Matt Clark through a lens of naive empathy. Despite Sharon's fierce maternal warnings and the paralyzing terror that gripped the Newman family, Mariah remained steadfast in her belief that Matt had transformed into a remorseful, eccentric man seeking redemption. This catastrophic misjudgment laid the groundwork for a nightmare that would soon engulf them all. Sharon watched helplessly as her daughter's dangerous curiosity drew her closer to a predator who had historically inflicted unspeakable trauma upon their family. Knowing that Matt's disarming new persona was nothing more than a meticulously crafted psychological camouflage designed to entrap the most vulnerable target available. The culmination of this impending disaster began on a seemingly quiet evening when Mariah received a cryptic text message that expertly targeted her deepest emotional vulnerabilities. The message did not rely on Matt's newfound charm to draw her out. Instead, it weaponized the most painful ghost of the Newman family's past, referencing a highly guarded secret connected to the tragic death of Cassie Newman. For Mariah, the memory of the twin sister she never truly knew, but whose immense shadow she had lived under for years, was an irresistible, fatal lure. The sheer audacity of the sender's claim that Cassie's fatal accident was not a simple tragedy, but rather the result of a complex, hidden conspiracy sparked a morbid, overwhelming curiosity within Mariah. Blinded by a desperate need for answers and her misplaced faith in her own ability to navigate danger, she made a spectacularly reckless decision. Without alerting her mother or anyone else who could have protected her, Mariah slipped into the night, determined to uncover the truth hidden within the shadows of Genoa City. The designated meeting point was desolate, located on the industrial outskirts of the city and shrouded in an ominous darkness that should have triggered every survival instinct Mariah possessed. As she navigated the isolated, uneven terrain, the chilling reality of her extreme vulnerability began to creep into her consciousness, slowly eroding the delusional optimism she had harbored since her release from the treatment facility. The heavy, oppressive silence of the night was broken only by the sound of her own hesitant footsteps, amplifying the growing sense of dread that coiled tightly in her stomach. When Matt Clark finally emerged from the obscurity of the shadows, the eccentric, humorous mask he had worn so convincingly for weeks instantly dissolved, revealing the cold, calculating narcissist lurking beneath. The sudden, chilling shift in his demeanor was a violent psychological blow to Mariah, forcing her to confront the terrifying truth that she had walked directly into a meticulously laid trap orchestrated by a man utterly devoid of genuine remorse. Before executing the physical capture, Matt engaged in a brutal campaign of psychological torture, systematically dismantling Mariah's remaining emotional defenses. He coldly informed her that the narrative the Newman family had accepted for decades regarding Cassie's death was a fabricated lie, a convenient tragedy that masked a much darker, far more sinister reality. According to Matt's twisted revelation, Cassie's fatal car accident was not the result of a simple, reckless teenage mistake, but rather the tragic consequence of a desperate attempt to meet a mysterious, unidentified individual moments before her demise. Mariah instinctively recoiled from the horrific implication, desperately trying to reject his claims as the manipulative fabrications of a known sociopath. She mentally accused him of weaponizing her family's deepest, most sacred grief for his own twisted amusement, clinging fiercely to the established history of her sister's demise to protect her own fragile sanity. However, Matt had fully anticipated her denial and swiftly delivered a devastating piece of physical evidence that completely shattered her psychological resistance. From the depths of his heavy coat, he produced an old, severely tarnished silver bracelet, its metal worn by time and the elements, but undeniably bearing the deeply engraved name of Cassie. The sight of the profoundly personal artifact acted as a paralyzing shockwave, freezing Mariah in a state of absolute horror and profound confusion. In that crucial moment of overwhelming vulnerability, as her mind raced frantically to process the impossible implications of the bracelet's existence, Matt struck with ruthless efficiency. The psychological manipulation seamlessly transitioned into physical violence as he overpowered the stunned and defenseless Mariah, dragging her forcefully into the suffocating darkness. The reckless pursuit of a ghostly truth had culminated in her sudden, terrifying disappearance, leaving behind only the echoing silence of the desolate meeting ground. The following morning, the suffocating silence in the Crimson Lights coffee house was violently ruptured by the arrival of a digital nightmare on Sharon's phone. The notification brought an image that would forever sear itself into a mother's darkest, most primal fears. A photograph of Mariah, visibly terrified, bound, and held captive in a bleak, undisclosed location. The visual confirmation of her daughter's abduction triggered a catastrophic emotional collapse for Sharon, plunging her instantly into a state of paralyzing panic. The very monster she had spent weeks desperately warning Mariah about had successfully executed his predatory strike, utilizing her daughter's fragile mental state and reckless empathy as the ultimate weapons of her own destruction. The sheer terror of knowing Mariah was entirely at the mercy of a man who harbored a deep, venomous, and historical hatred for the Newman family threatened to completely unmoor Sharon from reality. The horrifying photograph, however, was merely the prelude to a far more sinister and calculated extortion plot. Matt's accompanying demands were utterly devoid of typical financial greed. He sought a currency far more destructive and deeply personal. He demanded that Sharon publicly confess a highly guarded, devastating secret concerning Nick Newman. The specific nature of this secret carried the explosive potential to orchestrate Nick's absolute public and personal ruin, threatening to destroy his standing in the community and sever his ties with his loved ones. Matt's calculated ultimatum was a masterstroke of psychological warfare, meticulously designed to inflict maximum collateral damage across the entire Newman dynasty. He knew that forcing Sharon to be the active architect of Nick's destruction would provide him with a twisted, unparalleled sense of vengeance, punishing the family that had repeatedly thwarted, judged, and ostracized him in the past. Sharon found herself trapped in an agonizing, impossible dilemma, caught squarely in the crushing vice of two catastrophic outcomes. On one side, the life of her vulnerable daughter hung precariously in the balance, subjected to the cruel, unpredictable whims of a sociopathic captor who had already proven his capacity for extreme violence. On the other side stood the father of her children, a man who was already experiencing a profound, highly dangerous downward spiral. Nick had recently escaped his rehabilitation facility prematurely and was currently lost in the dangerous underbelly of Genoa City, battling a severe, life-threatening addiction crisis. A public confession of his darkest secrets at this exact moment of extreme vulnerability would not only destroy his reputation, but could very well push him over the edge into a fatal overdose. Sharon was being forced to weigh the immediate physical survival of her daughter against the psychological and literal survival of the man she had loved for decades. Driven by a desperate need to navigate this impossible labyrinth, Sharon attempted to employ her extensive psychological training to stall Matt's demands. She engaged in a perilous, high-stakes game of cat and mouse, carefully crafting responses designed to project compliance and submission while secretly buying critical time. Her primary objective was to decipher any hidden clues within the photograph or Matt's digital communications that could reveal Mariah's location, hoping to orchestrate a covert rescue operation before being forced to detonate the explosive secret. She meticulously analyzed the lighting, the background textures in the photo, and the specific phrasing of Matt's threats, desperately searching for a single vulnerability in his meticulously constructed extortion plot. Every passing second felt like an eternity, heavily burdened by the terrifying knowledge that any misstep in her psychological profiling could result in fatal consequences for Mariah. Matt, however, possessed a highly attuned predatory intuition and quickly recognized Sharon's desperate attempts to delay the inevitable confession. His patience, always a volatile and limited commodity, began to rapidly evaporate, leading to a terrifying escalation in his threats against the captive Mariah. He systematically increased the psychological pressure on Sharon, sending increasingly menacing messages that vividly detailed the potential physical consequences of her continued hesitation. He deliberately reminded her of his historical capacity for cruelty, stripping away any lingering, desperate hope that he might eventually show mercy to his captive. The escalation was a brutal, undeniable reminder that Sharon was not dealing with a rational adversary who could be reasoned with, but rather a man driven by an insatiable thirst for vengeance and a deep-seated desire to watch the Newman family tear itself apart from the inside out. The psychological warfare between the ruthless captor and the desperate mother intensified by the hour, transforming into a grueling, soul-crushing battle of endurance. Sharon's mind raced frantically through every conceivable scenario, desperately seeking a third option that would miraculously spare both her daughter and Nick. She strongly considered reaching out to Victor Newman, knowing his immense wealth and security resources could potentially locate Matt within hours, but she also knew that involving the ruthless patriarch could trigger a violent, uncontrollable confrontation that would put Mariah directly in the crossfire. She thought of Adam and Victoria, currently united in their desperate, frantic search for Nick, but realized that burdening them with this kidnapping could completely derail their efforts to save their brother from his drug-fueled spiral. Sharon was entirely isolated, forced to carry the crushing weight of this apocalyptic crisis alone, while staring down the barrel of Matt's unrelenting blackmail. The agonizing realization that Mariah's reckless actions had acted as the direct catalyst for this monumental disaster added a bitter, suffocating layer of resentment to Sharon's overwhelming despair. If Mariah had only listened to the repeated warnings, if she had not allowed her delusional belief in human redemption to blind her to Matt's inherent, undeniable evil, they would not be facing this catastrophic scenario. The sudden introduction of the Cassie mystery further complicated the narrative, leaving Sharon to agonizingly wonder if Matt truly possessed a dark, undiscovered secret about her deceased daughter, or if the tarnished bracelet was simply a brilliantly cruel prop used to ensnare Mariah's empathy. The profound uncertainty surrounding Cassie's final moments gnawed relentlessly at Sharon's soul, threatening to entirely unravel the years of agonizing grief and hard-won acceptance she had fought so desperately to achieve. As the absolute deadline for the public confession loomed closer, the suffocating pressure within the coffeehouse reached an unbearable, deafening crescendo. Matt delivered a final, terrifying ultimatum to Sharon's phone, a message completely devoid of any further negotiation, flexibility, or implied mercy. He presented her with a rigid, non-negotiable timeline, promising that if the secret regarding Nick was not broadcasted to the world by the designated hour, the consequences for Mariah would be severe, immediate, and entirely irreversible. The chilling finality of his words stripped away the last remnants of Sharon's stalling tactics, backing her entirely into a corner from which there appeared to be absolutely no escape. The familiar walls of the Crimson Lights felt as though they were physically closing in on her, perfectly mirroring the inescapable psychological trap that Matt had masterfully constructed around her life. In the suffocating, heavy silence of the empty coffeehouse, Sharon stared at the glowing screen of her phone, the small device now acting as the instrument of her impending doom. The entire fate of her family rested squarely on a decision that guaranteed the absolute destruction of someone she deeply loved. To save Mariah meant delivering a fatal, public blow to a broken, spiraling Nick Newman. To protect Nick meant abandoning her daughter to the infinite darkness of Matt Clark's vengeance. As the digital clock on her screen ticked relentlessly toward the final deadline, erasing the last seconds of her old life, a sudden, violent pounding erupted on the locked front door of the cafe. Sharon froze in terror, her heart hammering violently against her ribs as a shadowed figure pressed heavily against the frosted glass. Holding an unrecognizable object that glinted menacingly in the ambient streetlights, signaling that the nightmare was no longer just a digital threat, but had finally breached the threshold of her sanctuary.